Max Webster was a well-known band in Canada in the 1970s. They're from Toronto. Max put out 4 albums in the 1970s, all really great. They were a hard-driving rock band with prog flourishes. Max was quite big in Canada and toured the States often, one tour backing up Kiss. One band they often backed up and were great friends with was Rush. Rush played on their album A Million Vacations, I think on the tune Battle Scar.
This week's request comes from Mozo PG on the Progressive Ears forums, also known as Greg from Ottawa. Ottawa's the capital of Canada, you know.
Oh, Canada, our home and native.
Greg suggested Mutiny Up My Sleeve by Max Webster. And I'm sure most of you probably already know this, and I feel somewhat embarrassed admitting that I didn't. But much like Molly Hatchet, Max Webster is the name of the band, not the name of a person. I mean, it's almost certain that there's someone out there named Max Webster. They're just not in this band. The singer, guitarist, and primary songwriter for Max Webster is Kim Mitchell, and that's a name I definitely know, for a couple reasons. First, I kind of dug that song Go for Soda when it came out back in '84.
Might as well go for soda, nobody drowns and nobody dies.
And also, he made a cameo on Kids in the Hall on that last episode of the original run where Bruce McCullough was listing the things he wished he'd done.
I regret that we never had Kim Mitchell on the show.
And you remember when I mentioned Terry Brown a few weeks ago when I was talking about Hope by Klaatu? Well, Terry Brown produced Mutiny Up My Sleeve as well. Well, co-produced anyway. Apparently he left halfway through, and their original bassist, Mike Tilka, took over. In fact, check this out. Klaatu's Hope came out in '77, and Mutiny Up My Sleeve came out in '78, and here are the albums that Terry Brown worked on in between. Farewell to Kings,
To show a new mentality, closer to the heart.
Hemispheres, and Sir Army Suit, the third album by Klaatu.
But dear Christine, I hold you dearly.
And that, my brothers, sisters, and siblings, is officially all I know about Mutiny Up My Sleeve by Max Webster. So while I remedy this gap in my knowledge of Canadian prog, here's just a bit more from Greg.
Mutiny Up My Sleeve is a very diverse album with many influences, including Frank Zappa. I love all of the tunes, but especially Astonish Me, an absolutely stunning and emotive ballad. All of the songs have a unique style with lots of prog-based hard rock. The opening track, Lip Service, is full of quirky humor. The Party is another standout track, as is Beyond the Moon. The songs are relatively short, ranging from 3 to 6 minutes.
Very interesting. Before I listen to an album for the first time, I usually do a bit of research. Everything I read about Mutiny Up My Sleeve mentioned a Frank Zappa influence. And I kind of see it, in a narrow sense. That is, the music that Zappa was making around the time this album was released, right? So maybe the Zoot Allures to Shake Your Booty era, somewhere in there. I get moments like that on Mutiny Up My Sleeve. Mostly, though, what I hear so far reminds me something of Warren Zevon and maybe the Tubes. More straight-ahead mid-'70s rock with some intelligence, some humor, and flourishes of musical inventiveness. Case in point, the opening track, Lip Service. We start out in some very well-worn '70s rock territory.
Secondhand, telegram, lip service, legal love.
By the way, in case you're curious, what he's singing there is legal love. Legal. But at the end of that verse, there's a bass and drum breakdown followed by this clever little modulation. And just like that, we've gone from
How's life on this shore road?
all the way to
Big revolutions in my black book.
By contrast, Astonish Me starts off slower, but more sophisticated, with a main riff that leans heavily on minor ninth chords, followed by an inventive chromatic connecting figure. But then the first line of the song, well, it goes like this. Could you explain to a simple man why you always have to back away? And something in your eyes is asking me to make you stay. Gah. Creepy, right? Feels a bit like something from Skull Crusher Mountain by Jonathan Colton. If you could find some way to be a little bit less afraid of me, you'd see the voices that control me from inside my head say I shouldn't kill you yet. But that's just one moment in an otherwise inventive song, especially for what's essentially an arena ballad. And speaking of inventive, the verses in Let Your Man Fly use some clever changes, including some diminished passing chords. But to me, the coolest thing about Let Your Man Fly is the very ELO sounding harmonies on the chorus. That and Kim Mitchell's guitar work. The aggressive but understated solo, the riffs, and the harmonized single note fills. Oh, so I take back what I said about Astonish Me. If there's an arena ballad on this album, it's not Astonish Me, it's Water Me Down, for sure. Nice sounding spanky Fender guitar on that one too. Pleasant enough tune, but definitely the straightest song on the album. At the beginning of Distressed, you can hear a bit of that Zappa influence we talked about. The instrumental bridge interposed with fills from the Moog, that's cool. But the best part of Distressed is the heavy-handedness of the chorus. Big, heavy power chords and gigantic drum fills, while the lyrics go like this. I am perplexed. I am distressed. When did I park my wheels? When did I park my wheels? I love that. And then the live tune, The Party. Okay, check this out.
Still searching for her roots. She likes concert blisters and leather boots and knows one fact, her act is to get loose.
Followed immediately by...
And we're just musicians, here to thin the thickness of your skin.
Fun. Waterline is mostly a blues-based mid-tempo rocker, but it does include a solo on a fuzz bass, which is never not cool. Hawaii is a pretty little, mostly instrumental tune, played with instruments that don't appear anywhere else on the album. Piano, glockenspiel, acoustic guitar, bird calls. And finally, Beyond the Moon, which starts very strong. And it ends pretty strong too, with some demanding 16th note arpeggios played pretty darn well by Kim Mitchell. In between, Beyond the Moon is probably the most progressively structured song on the album, with alternating delicate and heavy sections, and a tighter composition in the individual parts. But if you were to ask me to categorize the album overall, I don't know that I would use progressive. I don't think that's the word I'd use. Much of Mutiny Up My Sleeve is pretty straight-ahead 70s rock, with the real differentiation being the humor in some of the lyrics and the inventive changes. Oh, it has prog moments, to be sure, but mostly along the lines of like the completion backwards principle by the Tubes. That and the often glibness of the lyrics, with straight-ahead sensibilities with the rock grooves behind it, all of that combines to remind me a bit of Excitable Boy by Warren Zevon. It's going to be interesting to see what repeated listens will uncover. So let me do that, while Greg provides some more information about Mutiny Up My Sleeve.
This is a top 50 album out of my 2000 collection. Kim Mitchell, the lead guitarist and singer, had solo success in the 1980s with hits such as Patio Lanterns, which was more commercial. But Max Webster is near and dear to my heart, as a teen in the 70s and part of the Smokey and Stoney era. I think they could have broken the States like their brothers, Rush.
Something I struggle with as I am trying to accurately describe the music I hear is literally how to do it. How to convey specifically what I'm hearing. Often the easiest way is to cite similarities to other works, but this can be challenging for a few reasons. If, for example, I were to say that Lip Service by Max Webster reminds me of Arctic Monkeys, which it kind of does, that information in and of itself might not be that helpful, because I don't mean that the bands sound similar at all. In this case, it means that the intro to Lip Service uses similar phrasing and a similar guitar tone to the intro to Do I Wanna Know from the Arctic Monkeys album AM. And while I try to be as exact as I can when making these comparisons, in the end, it really is dancing about architecture. Cross-modal translation is not a lossless process. Of course, the solution to that problem is just to not cross modalities, right? I could just play examples of each and let you hear them for yourself. The problem there becomes copyright. I can't play more than just a few seconds of music before YouTube flags my video. And often it takes more than just a few seconds to illustrate my point. The comparison I made earlier, that Max Webster reminds me a bit of Warren Zevon, this is a prime example of what I mean. Mutiny Up My Sleeve does not sound enough like Excitable Boy for a 5-second clip to show what I mean. But on Lip Service, when the band breaks all the way down and Kim Mitchell sings,
I should be down under, pushing up wheat for the hungry.
That superimposition of that sentiment against the previous descriptions of a lawyer's wife using deft and humorous prose, all driven by a solid mid-70s straight-ahead rock groove. It all conveys the same spirit you hear in a lot of Warren Zevon's music, though not nearly as political or as melancholy. Or at least it does to me, because I've been listening to Warren Zevon since I was a kid, and I just now heard Max Webster for the first time. So this is an arrow of personal association and not of causality. And given that I'd heard Max Webster described as Canadian prog, and given that the album was produced by the same guy that produced both Klaatu and Rush, and given that Max Webster worked and recorded together with Rush, I came into this week with high and specific expectations, I think. But even though the gap between what I was expecting and what I ultimately heard was fairly large this week, I still feel like I've discovered something pretty cool in Max Webster's Mutiny Up My Sleeve. There's an intelligence and a deftness to Max Webster that's often lacking in this style of music. These guys are pretty slick. Plus, Kim Mitchell's a heck of a guitarist. I like it. Thanks, Greg. Final thoughts, scale of 1 to 10. I give Mutiny Up My Sleeve by Max Webster 20 assorted Timbits.
Right now, get 20 Timbits for $1.99.
See you next week.